All right. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to tonight's webinar on international surrogacy. First of all, thank you, everyone, for giving up your Friday night to be with us this evening. For those of you who are partial, hopefully you've had a chance to grab a glass of wine, champagne, tea, soft drink, whatever your weapon of choice is, to toast the week that was and to keep us hydrated through tonight's discussion. Look, we do have a lot to cover tonight, so let's jump straight into it. Firstly, some housekeeping. If anyone has any questions throughout the evening, the chat function has been disabled, but you can utilize the Q&A function that you can find at the bottom of the screen. I'll save the questions to the end because I might cover some of the information that you've already asked. Now, the questions submitted can't be seen by everyone else in the webinar, so don't be shy, don't be afraid to ask anything. There are no silly questions when it comes to surrogacy, and I have heard them all. There'll also be a chance for open mic questions at the end if anyone is brave enough to come off mute, for those that wish. If we are having any technical issues, I do have IT on standby if needed, so I can always give them a call. Look, I will be sending them a copy of a lot of the notes that we go over today, so please feel free to just sit back, relax and take it all in. That being said, let's start off with what we'll be discussing tonight. Look, we'll start off with some introductions about myself and also get to know a little bit more about Tammuz Family. We will then look up at the different types of surrogacy and different approaches to surrogacy that are out there. And we'll also look at what makes up the elements of a surrogacy journey, including who is eligible. We will then take a bit of a closer look at the two big parts that make up a surrogacy journey, and that are the egg donors and the surrogates. Who are they? Where do they come from? What does it take to be one of these amazing women? Put that all together, and overall, you have the journey as a process from start to finish. So we'll look at that, and we'll also look at the timelines that you might expect on a journey. Towards the end of the evening, we will discuss more about the destinations that are available and also some costs you might incur throughout your journey. And last but not least, there'll be some time for some questions at the end. So I guess now is a good time as any, I guess, to segue into a bit of introduction. For those of you who don't know me or who haven't met before, my name is Stephen, and my partner Tim and I are the very two proud dads of amazing bubs who were born through surrogacy in Colombia. So Lincoln is 10 months old. He was born in Bogota last year. And Lola is almost 4 months old. And she was born in Medellin at the start of this year. Now, I know what you're all thinking, and I thought the same thing. If someone said to me 2 years ago that I would be in one of those cheesy family photos that you see advertised, I would have just laughed at them. But here we are, how times have changed. Now, I did say two bubs, but I mustn't forget our firstborn, that is Duke Maguire Swanepoel of Surrey the First, or as he is more affectionately known, Duke. Along with being a new parent, I'm also the head of operations for Tammuz Family here in Australia, and have been for the past 2 years or so, but that wasn't always the case. I actually started off my journey as an intended parent, just like all of you here this evening, and it probably wasn't about halfway through our journey when our rep at the time had to leave and he moved to the USA. So that kind of left an opening for me to step into this role. So in essence, for a while, not only was I on my own surrogacy journey, but I was also managing that journey. I was also managing my partner's journey and also managing a whole bunch of other intended parents' journey as well. So look, a very, very steep learning curve for me in the first couple of months, but I had a lot of support from Tammuz itself, and also other intended parents that had been through the journey. And to me, that's really the crux of what Tammuz Family is all about. It's a community of parents. It's the community of intended parents, all supporting one another in their own journey to parenthood. So look, that's just a little bit about me. Let's talk a little bit more about Tammuz and who we are. Well, we have been around for quite a long period of time. In fact, this is our 15th year. And throughout this time, we have helped thousands of intended parents from all walks of life, whether they be gay, straight, trans, non-binary, single, couple, anyone and everyone to kind of help them achieve their dreams, becoming a parent and starting their own family. And as we are in our 15th year, we're actually very, very close to ticking over to our 1500 baby. So a bit of a serendipity moment there for our 15th year, which we're very excited about. Now, over the years, we have had a lot of international surrogacy experience in a range of destinations, from India, Nepal, Thailand. Those destinations are no longer available to foreign internationals at the moment, to also our more recent destinations, being the United States, Colombia, Mexico, Georgia, and Ukraine. Now, Tammuz, we are a global brand. We do have a global footprint. We do have territory managers across the globe, from Japan, the Nordics. As I mentioned, I look after Australia, the UK, New Zealand. We also have China, Brazil. John down the bottom there, he looks after the North Americas as well. Anywhere and anywhere that people are trying to find ways to become parents, you'll find Tammuz there. Okay, so let's look into a little bit more detail. So as you can see from the next slide, there are many different types of surrogacies and different ways to approach a surrogacy journey. Now, look, there are going to be pros and cons to each one of these approaches. And for the purpose of tonight, we won't be debating on which is the best approach, because the answer for that is really dependent on the individual. So rather, I'll just share our view on the landscape and also where Tammuz sits. So the first option you see on the screen there is domestic versus international. I mean, fairly self-explanatory there. You can either choose to do your surrogacy journey 100% in your local country, Australia, or wherever you're calling in from, or you can choose to do your surrogacy journey internationally in a different country, part of your journey or all of your journey. The next option there is commercial versus altruistic. So a commercial surrogacy is when there is a financial benefit or an incentive payment, and that's paid to the egg donor and the surrogate for their services. On the flip side of that, you have the altruistic journey. So this is a situation where there is no financial benefit or financial incentive for the egg donor or the surrogate. Now, that doesn't mean that their costs aren't covered. The intended parents normally cover all the costs for the journey. There just can't be a specific payment for the journey at the end. Now, of course, there are ways around that. There are always ways to show your appreciation to someone, whether it be gifting them a present or taking them on a holiday. There are ways around that. The next option you see on the screen is gestational versus traditional. So gestational is when the egg donor and the surrogate are two separate women. Okay, so there's no genetic link for the surrogate when she carries that embryo. Normally in this approach, the embryo has been created in the IVF method or the ICSI method. Now, the other approach there is traditional. That's when a surrogate actually provides her own eggs for the journey, and the embryo is normally created either via IUI, which is intrauterine insemination, or also it can be created by IVF. Last but not least, you have independent versus agency. So for intended parents looking for an independent journey, that is where you manage and you coordinate everything yourself. You find your own egg donor, you find your surrogate, you find the IVF clinic that you want to handle with your embryo creation. You create your own legal team. So you just manage and coordinate all the steps of your journey yourself. And last but not least is the agency. Do you choose to employ an agency to do your journey, all of it or part of it? That's the final option there. Now, some of these options will go hand in hand. Some can be mixed and matched. For example, a journey in Canada would be considered an international altruistic journey, and that's normally done independently in Canada. And also there are some approaches that can't be mixed together. So for example, in Australia specifically, you won't be able to do a domestic commercial surrogacy journey because it's illegal. And so because of that fact, you probably wouldn't find an agency based in Australia that offers support or assistance for a domestic journey, just because there's no commercial element there. Now, for Tim and I, when we started our journey at the very beginning, we were very kind of unsure of what approach we wanted to take. We didn't even know that there were different approaches out there. All we knew is that, we wanted to be parents. So in the beginning, we started in the domestic landscape. We kind of looked around, we talked to friends, we talked to family to see if any of them would potentially be our potential egg donor or a potential surrogate. But unfortunately, we just didn't have much luck in that area. So the next step for us is we actually turned to Facebook. We joined a lot of different Facebook groups, one of them being the Australian surrogacy community. However, we were only in there a short time before we kind of realized that this wasn't going to be the approach for us. Because what we kind of saw in those groups that it was just a very, very long list of intended parents and a very, very short list, of available surrogates. We didn't want to feel as if we had to either sell ourselves or compete with other intended parents in those groups. We didn't think that we were any more deserving than any other couple to be an intended parent. So that's when we started to explore some other options. We actually went to a surrogacy conference, and that really opened up our eyes. We saw the different possibilities and the different options that were out there. And actually, that's how we first met the rep for Tammuz Family. So where do they sit on this scale? Well, at Tammuz, we are a full service agency. What does that mean? We handle everything from start to finish. We offer international commercial surrogacy options, and all of the journeys are gestational, meaning that there's no genetic link between the surrogate and the egg donor, so they're going to be two separate women. So for us, after weighing up all the different approaches, we kind of felt like this approach for us hit the nail on the head. The reason why we liked it and the reason why we kind of lent with Tammuz is that we liked that they'd been around for a long period of time. That was quite important to us. We liked that they had experience in multiple destinations. Tim and I, we always kind of think about that what if scenario, what if that clinic, shut down that we chose? Do we have an option for another clinic? What if that destination closed its doors? We're always kind of thinking of the what if, and we kind of felt Tammuz had that support in that area. We also liked that the rep that we met had been on his own surrogacy journey, so he really could kind of relate to everything that we'd been through. But for us, the real clincher was the guaranteed plan that they offered. When we compared other agencies and different clinics, this is kind of something that we thought maybe set them apart from everyone else. And I'll kind of explain that in a little bit more detail, and I'll show that on the next slide. So what it is, it's a guaranteed program. And what that means is it offers unlimited attempts at every single step of the process until you get to the end, which is a live birth. So for us, that was a big kind of light bulb moment. Having that financial peace of mind was just one thing less for us to worry about throughout our journey, because obviously in a surrogacy journey, there are going to be stresses. This is just one less thing that we kind of had to worry about. And we're glad that we chose this because we needed this guaranteed program. And I'll explain why we needed it in a little bit. But for now, we're actually going to go back to basics and revisit our biology class from year 11. So back to basics, let's look at what makes up the elements of a surrogacy journey. So you need the sperm, you need the egg together, you put them together and you create the embryo. That embryo can then be transferred into your surrogate. Now, you may have none of these elements. You may have one of these elements of the equation. You may have two elements of the equation. But the underlying factor is that you don't have all the elements and you need assistance for it. That is what makes you eligible for a surrogacy journey. So for argument's sake, I might have a gay couple. They have sperm, but they don't have anyone to be their egg donor. So they need an egg donor and they need someone to be their surrogate. I might have a heterosexual couple where the woman is having trouble with their own eggs. So they also need an egg donor. Or they might not have any troubles with their sperm or any troubles with their egg. The woman just has some trouble carrying or conceiving. So in that situation, they'll need just the surrogate. For a single parent, again, they might be able to provide the sperm or they might be able to provide the egg. And again, they just need a couple of the other elements of the journey. The underlying link at the end of the day is that everyone kind of needs a surrogate. That's kind of what brings everyone together. Now, a large portion of the journeys that we do see need the egg donor and the surrogate. So we're going to focus a little bit on that tonight. And we're going to take a bit of a closer look at those two elements in a little bit more detail. So let's start with the egg donors. Look, predominantly the egg donors are local women, young women, between the ages of 18 and 29, depending on the different destination. And the reason for that is the younger the women or the younger the woman, the better the quality of the eggs. Now, also all the egg donors are background checked. They need to do a drug and alcohol screening. They need to be medically screened. They go through a psychological evaluation as well. You also see on the screen there that the egg donors go through a genetic testing panel. Now, this is different across each destination. In the USA program, you get a very vast genetic panel that covers a lot of genetic conditions, whereas panels such as the Colombia and Mexico program, they have a slightly smaller panel. Now, some intended parents come to us and say, look, we are a carrier of a specific gene. We really want to make sure that our egg donor doesn't carry that gene. Absolutely, that's possible. We can make sure that your egg donor doesn't carry that gene. If she hasn't been tested, we can arrange that. It does come at additional cost, but it's one of the things that we can arrange in part of the program. Now, you might see one thing on the screen there that might give you pause, or you might give you maybe a bit of a question mark over it, and that's anonymous donation. So depending on the destination you choose, will depend on whether or not your egg donor needs to be anonymous. So in the Colombia and Mexico programs, egg donation by law has to be anonymous. Now, when I say anonymous, I don't mean that you are picking an egg donor out of a black bag. No, that's not the case. All of the destinations, whether it be USA, Colombia, Mexico, Georgia, all have really great websites where you can have a look at the egg donors and choose your egg donor from that website. They've got great filters. You can filter them to hair color, eye color, blood type. Did they go to university? What's their GPA? So really, really great websites. In the USA, we find that the majority of egg donors prefer to be anonymous. However, there are some egg donors that are open to communication. It's just on a case-by-case basis. Now, you will see down the bottom of the screen there some photos that are actually screenshots or photos from the egg donors from the different programs. So sometimes intended parents ask me, are the egg donors real? How can we be certain that they are who they say they are, especially when it comes to anonymous donation? Well, egg donors are identified by their own unique code, which is used both on the website and all the paperwork and in the clinic. We work with very reputable clinics and reputable egg donor agencies to ensure the legitimacy of this process and also that the information provided. And funny kind of story, in Colombia, when we were visiting there, we actually saw a couple of our egg donors that had made our shortlist. And I've gotten that same message from a couple of other intended parents that have attended the clinic when they do their sperm deposit. So it's very nice to hear. Let's go on to the surrogates. Now, similarly to the egg donors, the surrogates are going to be medically screened. They are going to be background checked. They need to go under a drug and alcohol check. They need to partake in a psychological evaluation. So the surrogacy agency has quite a vigorous screening process. And only about 1 in 4 surrogates actually get approved for the program. Now, you'll see on the screen there, it says altruistic and financially motivated. This is commercial surrogacy. So it's natural for a surrogate to have a financial motivation. I mean, many of the times, the reason why they are wanting to be a surrogate is to provide some greater opportunities for their family. For us on our journey, we know that our surrogate, Carolina, through our discussion with her, she really enjoyed both of our pregnancies with her first 2 children. But she didn't want to have any more children. And she was using this opportunity to actually be able to send her daughter to business school. So that was kind of a good moment for us as well. But along with that financial motivation, it's very important that there is an altruistic motivation as well. So the surrogate agency won't accept women into the program who are, just looking for a quick cash handout. They can't be financially destitute. They need to be women who are financially stable. They need to have a supportive environment and a supportive network. And they really need to be wanting to do this for the right reasons. Now, additionally, on the screen, you'll see that surrogates need to be women who have given birth already. And this is quite important for a couple of reasons. The first one is purely from a medical point of view. We want to be able to see that a surrogate can go through their pregnancy successfully and without any further complications. The second reason is from a psychological point of view. It's important that when a surrogate comes to do her surrogacy journey, that they have completed their own family and they're not looking to do a surrogacy journey. They're not looking to have any more children on their own. And so that's another reason why they need to have already given it birth before. Now, down the bottom of the screen, you will see some examples of profiles below. These are from the different programs. There are 2 profiles there from the USA. There is one profile from Colombia and one from Mexico. So slightly different profiles that give slightly different information, but generally there's enough information on that profile for intended parents, to make a decision. Sometimes intended parents ask us, will the surrogate want to keep my baby? And the answer to that is always no. There is no genetic link between the surrogate and the child. They've finished with their own family. They're not looking to increase their family by any more children. They do go through a psychological evaluation, so they understand, the process that they're going through, and that psychological checkups happen throughout the journey as well. And last but not least, again, as I mentioned before, there is that financial motivation for them. So by completing the journey from start to finish, they do get that financial reward at the end. Unfortunately, the biggest fear that we have as an agency is a situation where the intended parents fail to fulfill their end of the bargain and they don't come to pick up their baby. So that's our biggest fear. But for the other worry, it has never been an issue in the past 15 years that we've been helping, intended parents. So you put it all together, what does it look like? What does a journey look like from start to finish? Well, the process might be slightly different depending on the destination that you choose, but here is a bit of an overall snapshot of what a journey could look like with the different steps. So we've kind of broken it down into 7 steps. And like any good process, the first step is going to be the paperwork. So after you've met with an agency or met with a clinic or you've met with somebody and you've had that consult, you decided on a destination, you've decided on the program, you'll begin the paperwork. And that's normally the signing of the contract. You'll also normally pay your initial deposit. Now, payments at Tammuz are all done in milestones. So it depends on the program that you choose. Your payment milestones might be when you're matched with a surrogate. It might be when you have an embryo transfer. And there are even some payments that happen at the end of the journey once you're actually pregnant. So that's a way of kind of spreading out the financial cost, over many months and sometimes even over a year or so. The other part of the paperwork process is the submission of documents. So things like your birth certificate, your passport, your background checked. We also get intended parents to do a semen analysis. And that's just to ensure that anyone that goes on the guarantee program is not infertile. Last but not least is an STI report. So if we have any of our intended parents that are living with HIV or HEP, they can still be assisted. We have a process at the clinics called a sperm washing procedure. Now, the next step in your surrogacy journey is the semen deposit. And there are 2 ways that you can actually go about this. The first way is the preferred method, and that is flying to your destination and actually doing the semen deposit at the clinic itself. Now, the reason why this is the preferred method is because we believe it's just a great start to your journey. You get to visit the clinic, you get to meet the doctors, you meet all the staff, you get to sign a lot of the paperwork in person, and look, it's a great hands-on experience, no pun intended, to start your journey. The other option that is available to intended parents is the option to ship their sperm. Now, not every destination can accept sperm shipment at the moment. For example, Mexico is just taking too long to get the permits to do that. So the only areas that we're shipping sperm at the moment are Colombia and the USA. When it does come to sperm shipment, there are going to be additional costs. There are sometimes additional tests that are required, additional paperwork, some additional legwork, but it's definitely a possibility for intended parents that wish to go down that pathway. For Tim and I, we actually started our surrogacy journey in the heart of COVID. So no flights were going at that time. So we had no option but to ship our sperm. And in the end, that actually set us back around $7,000 US. So a bit of a costly exercise for us. The next step in a surrogacy journey is the egg donor selection. And look, this is probably the last time an intended parent has a lot of control in their part of the journey, because after this point, a lot of it's left to the doctors and the medical aspects of the process. Now, as I mentioned before, all of our programs have really great egg donor websites to help you pick your egg donor choice. Again, you can filter the websites for hair color, eye color, Did your egg donor go to university? What's her family history like of strokes, of heart condition? Anything that you need to really make an informed decision when picking your egg donor. When you do get to this part of the process, you create a shortlist and you submit that list to the clinic. And then we reach out to each one of those egg donors to find out when and if they are available. The egg donor that you end up reserving will be based on their availability. When Tim and I actually went through our egg donor process, we went away to separate computers and we came up with the top 10, and then we kind of came back together. It was actually quite surprising to see how many egg donors we actually picked that were the same. And in the end, that actually became our shortlist from the egg donors that we both picked. So after you have gotten your sperm to the clinic, after you've chosen your egg donor, now we can look at the embryo creation stage. It's this part of the process that your egg donor will begin her hormone medication. And this is to stimulate her ovaries. We're looking to increase the number of eggs she's currently producing in the hopes that when she comes in for her egg retrieval, there will be a high number of eggs to start off with. And the reason why it's important to try and start off with as many eggs as possible is because in the embryo creation process, it's normal that not every single egg retrieved is going to be of good enough quality to be fertilized. Additionally, not every single egg that's been retrieved can be fertilized into an embryo. And additionally, not every single embryo is going to survive all the way to the blastocyst stage. Now, that's that nice round formation of the embryo. It's usually around day 5, day 6. Now, it's actually a good thing that not every single egg or embryo survives to day 5, day 6, because you only want the strongest embryos to survive. You want the healthiest embryos to survive. You want the highest chance of a successful embryo transfer. The method all our clinics use to fertilize the eggs is the ICSI method, and that's just where the doctors select a single sperm and fertilize the egg individually. Now, after those embryos have been fertilized, after they've been cultivated to that day 5, day 6, and just before the embryos get frozen, a very small portion of the fluid of each embryo is taken and then gets sent off for PGS testing. PGS testing is pre-genetic screening. And what we're doing here is we are checking the embryos for the correct number of chromosomes. So you don't want to see too many. You don't want to see not enough. You want to see the correct number. Now, a lot of people think about, Down syndrome when I come to this part of the conversation, because that's a chromosomal difference. That is what the PGS report will actually pick up. It will tell you which embryo is the healthiest, which one to transfer, and which embryo not to transfer. Now, the PGS report will also tell you the gender of each embryo. So depending on the destination you choose and the program that you choose, there are some options around gender guarantees, gender preference, whereas some other destinations, the clinic will only ever transfer the highest quality embryo, and that's regardless of the preference of the intended parents. Now, the PGS report is a fairly highly accurate accuracy rate for gender. It's about 92%, so pretty high. And for our very first journey, we had a female embryo that was transferred and was successful. So for the first 12 weeks, we were picking out girls' names. We were planning princess parties in our head. That is, until we came to our 13th week scan and we had the video call with the doctor and we saw on the ultrasound. And that's when we found out that our she was actually a he. So this was actually a super special and exciting moment for both of us. We didn't care what gender our baby was, but I mean, there's sometimes in a surrogacy journey, there aren't that many unknowns or surprises, as you normally know everything that's happening, the exact time that your egg donor is coming in, you're knowing when the embryo transfer is happening. So to kind of get this little surprise at this part of our journey was really a bit of an exciting moment for both of us. Okay, so look, once you've successfully created your embryos and they're ready to go, you will then be placed on the waiting list for a surrogate. Now, when you're placed on the waiting list, when you are matched with a surrogate, it's slightly different depending on which destination you choose and which program you choose. But generally, the wait begins after your embryos have been created. Unlike the egg donor website, where you've had a lot of egg donors to choose from, in the surrogate matching process, it's slightly different. When you reach the top of the list, you'll actually be provided with a profile. And in that profile will be all the information you need to help you make your decision on whether or not you want to proceed with her as your surrogate. Now, as I mentioned a little bit before, different destinations have different matching processes. For example, in Colombia and the USA, you get to have a video call with your surrogate beforehand, and you get to decide whether you want to proceed with her. Whereas in Georgia and Mexico, there isn't a video call, and you need to make a decision based on the profile provided. In the countries where you do get to have that video call, it's a great opportunity to ask all the questions that are important for you and your journey. What kind of support do you have during the journey? Why are you doing this? What kind of communication do you want? What kind of relationship do you want afterwards? So anything that you think might help you to make a decision if you want this woman to be your surrogate or not. If after the video call you're happy and you want to proceed, then she also gets the option to make a decision as well. And then if you both agree to decide to move forward, then it's considered a mutual decision, and then we have a match. Now, sometimes intended parents ask me, is there ever a chance that a surrogate won't want to match with me? No. When we have matched every single intended parent with a surrogate, there has never been a situation where we haven't been able to match someone. So don't let that be a concern for your journey. The next part of the journey is probably one of the most exciting, as your surrogate goes into her medical preparations in preparation for her embryo transfer. Now, timelines for this process, again, will vary depending on the destination, and it will be the doctor's decision about when the embryo transfer date will be set. Once the embryo transfer has been taken place, your surrogate will go through a couple of initial tests to determine if the transfer was a success. The first one being the beta test. In that test, we're measuring your surrogate's HCG levels of your surrogate. If that's positive, then she can proceed to the heartbeat test. If that is also positive, she then enters the pregnancy monitoring phase. And while again, it's slightly different in each destination, the minimum across all the destinations is actually set to a standard Western medicine pregnancy protocol. So on the screen, you can actually see an example of a schedule of tests for a surrogate on the Colombian journey. She needs to attend the clinic for each one of these appointments. Each time she does attend, she also checks in with a psychologist. She checks in with a surrogate mother coordinator. After each appointment, we also provide the intended parents with a medical report, and that includes all the images from the ultrasound. Now, there are also a couple of opportunities throughout the journey for some video calls as well. When you get to attend these, you get to see the ultrasound monitor, you get to hear things like the heartbeat, you can have a chat with your surrogate too. There's always an interpreter on the line if English is not their first language. And for Tim and I remember hearing our baby's heartbeat for the very first time. It was just a super special moment, and one that we won't forget. Gosh, now the final stage in your surrogacy journey is probably the one that you have waited for the longest. And of course, that is the birth. Now, we recommend intended parents fly to their destination around week 37. And depending on the advice of the doctor, the development of the baby, also the surrogate's medical history, that will determine whether the birth is a natural birth or whether it's a C-section. It cannot be a decision, unfortunately, of the intended parents. It has to be a decision of the doctor. Now, generally, the birth will happen in a private hospital. And after your baby is born, they will be monitored for the next 24 to 48 hours. They receive any care, attention, any necessary vaccinations before being given the all clear to be discharged. Now, in destinations such as Colombia, Mexico, and Georgia, intended parents are not allowed to be in the birthing suite. However, in the USA, there are some options for the intended parents to be present. It just depends on the doctor, and it just depends on your surrogate as well. Throughout the entire process, you will be continued to be supported by either our reps at the clinic or by the legal team. They will ensure that you have all the correct paperwork that you need for that part of the journey. Once you leave the hospital, the baby is, or your baby is 100% into your care. So now, as being new parents, you get to make all the weird and wonderful decisions that come along with parenthood. Don't fear, you will be 100% supported and fully supported by the clinic, by the doctors, again, by the legal team, to make sure you have everything you need in the coming weeks to assist. And that can include in-house visits at your Airbnb or at your hotel by a pediatrician. It can be a nurse that comes for 2 or 3 times a week. It could be a nurse overnight. Again, the legal support that can assist with things like the birth certificate, the passport, any other documents that your surrogate may need to sign as well, to help you with the next steps in the part of the process. That next step in the part of the process is that final exciting chapter of your surrogacy journey. You've been on it for many, many, many months, and now you finally get to come home. But how does it actually work? How do you actually bring the baby back home? Well, it's slightly different per destination, but from a high-level overview, and for our Australian intended parents, this part will be focused predominantly for you. The process in which you bring your baby back home is actually called a citizenship by descent. Now, that process you can complete online. You need to complete that process first. What you're doing is you're transferring your Australian citizenship. So it's under the assumption that either one of the intended parents has their own Australian citizenship. There are ways around that if you're on a PR, but that's a bit more of a further discussion. But you are transferring your Australian citizenship to your child. Once that's been approved, you can then apply for your baby's Australian passport. Initially, you will be given the emergency passport because that's just the quickest, and you can actually fly home on that. And then when you get back to Australia, you actually pick up your baby's full passport. You can actually see on the screen there's a photo of the day that we finally picked up Lola's emergency passport. This was taken directly outside the embassy in Bogota. We were very, very excited, obviously, and that was just a couple of days before we were due to fly home. Now, how long does this process take? Well, look, again, it's different for every destination. For example, in Colombia and Mexico, we recommend intended parents allow at least 10 to 12 weeks, whereas in the USA, it's just a quicker process. You can do everything in around a 3 to 4 week time frame. Why the big difference in time? Well, look, the main reason for that is the USA has just got a very, very strong legal framework. You can do a lot of the legal paperwork beforehand. The immigration department recognizes the pre-birth order of the birth certificate, and you get both intended parents' names on the birth certificate as well. Colombia, Mexico, the immigration department just takes a little bit of a closer look at each one of those applications. There are some additional steps that are required, including a DNA test. So processing in those countries just take a little bit longer. So all in all, that's kind of a bit of a high-level overview of the steps that can make up a surrogacy journey. Now, the most common question I get asked from intended parents is, how long will my journey take? And look, it's a very challenging question to answer. And every time I do answer, I normally say, look, how long is a piece of string? And I can see that it's a very frustrating answer for my intended parents. So I try and break it down a little bit. The answer is it really depends on your own journey and how you build that journey and what you encounter on it. So as you can see from the timeline here on your screen, there are quite a few steps, and it all depends on how each one of those steps goes. I mean, for example, at step 1, the paperwork. How quickly can you submit all your documents? How quick can you get your semen analyzed, your STI report? How quick can you get all those submitted? Step 2, when you're doing your semen deposit, are you flying to the clinic? Will you be flying now, or will you be flying in a couple of months? When it comes to your egg donor choice, how flexible are you in choosing your egg donor? Have you got your heart set on one particular egg donor that may not be available for a couple of months? Or are you more flexible and you are open to a couple of different options and you choose one that is, more readily available? When it comes to the embryo creation stage, what happens if your egg donor has a poor egg retrieval? What happens if your semen doesn't like that egg donor and for whatever reason, they're not a match and no embryos are created? So there are all these little things that can potentially add time to your journey overall. But one thing that you don't have to worry about is that on the guaranteed program, you're covered. You're covered for those unlimited attempts at every single step of the process. So that actually takes a lot of the emotional and financial stress, off of intended parents. And as I mentioned quite early on in the webinar tonight, Tim and I absolutely needed that guarantee. Our journey had its challenges. It wasn't smooth sailing. Initially, our first egg donor retrieval, only one of us created usable embryos and the other one didn't. So we had to go back one step, pick a new egg donor and create some more embryos.
We also weren't successful in our first embryo transfer. We needed that second and third attempt. We even had a situation where we needed to be rematched with a surrogate because she pulled out the day before the embryo transfer was meant to happen. Now, of course, at the time, that was very upsetting, but in hindsight, I'm just very glad that she pulled out the day before, and not the day after. And yes, I can look back at these moments now with a bit of a smile, but the main point to take away here is that there are so many different variables that can dictate, how short or how long an intended parent's journey can be overall. But for those of you that are sitting at home and just saying, give me a number, look, a bit of a ballpark figure that we give to intended parents for a surrogacy journey, is between 14 months and 2 years. Now, those dates are not a flaw. They're not a ceiling. I have seen journeys that are shorter. I have seen journeys that are longer. But in general, overall, that's kind of a bit of the ballpark you should be working towards or that you can anticipate. Now, if you're out there, if you're doing your research and you meet an agency or you meet a clinic and then they promise you a baby in less than a year or 9 months, I would just be very wary, okay? Unfortunately, there are a lot of people out there that will overpromise. They will try to sell you the world. And then once that contract is signed, suddenly all the timelines change or the promises kind of change. So now that you know how a surrogacy journey could look, the real big question is, where do you go? Which destination do you choose? Which program in that destination? So as I mentioned at the start of tonight's webinar, there are quite a few different destinations that are offered. However, not every destination is open to everyone. So for our gay couples and for our single intended parents, you can begin your surrogacy journey in America, Colombia, or Mexico. For our heterosexual couples, the options are fairly similar. You can also choose America and Mexico, but instead of Colombia, you have Georgia as an option. With Georgia, however, you do need to be married or be able to prove that you're in a relationship for 1 year or longer. But still, how do you decide? How do you kind of compare apples with oranges? It can be a very confusing landscape. Well, to assist intended parents in this part of the process, we've kind of created a bit of a comparison table that highlights the differences of all the different destinations and the programs that they offer. We've found that going over this comparison table during one of our one-on-one consults, it helps intended parents identify the things that are most important to them on a surrogacy journey. And it's trying to figure out which destination ticks most of those boxes while also staying within their budget. Now, a question that I get asked from time to time is that, why did Tim and I choose Colombia? Well, we chose it for a couple of reasons. We always wanted to have 2 children, and we didn't want to take the risk of a twin journey that's offered in the USA. The double guarantee program that was offered to us via Colombia, guaranteed the birth of 2 babies, and we could both be a sperm provider. We could actually do one journey and then do another one 2 years later, or we could do both journeys at the exact same time. We had the choice. We also really liked that the Colombia program came with a lot of inclusions. So things such as the NICU costs, that was all included, all the surrogate costs were included. And we needed the NICU. On one of our journeys, one of our babies was born a little bit early. So they actually spent about 5 or 6 days, in NICU. That was all completely covered, supported by the legal team, supported by the reps. It was just, again, one less thing that we had to kind of stress or worry about. Last but not least, we absolutely loved the egg donor database that the Colombia program offered. We just thought all the egg donors were absolutely stunning, beautiful women, and we had no problem picking our egg donor from there. Additionally, the Colombia program was just really an affordable price point for us at that time as well. Affordability. So, okay, talking about affordability, what are some of the costs you may expect, on your own surrogacy journey? Well, again, it kind of goes back to that equation. What parts of the equation do you have? What is your current situation? Are you an intended parent that has the sperm and just needs an egg and a surrogate? Or are you an intended couple that already have their own eggs or already have their own embryos and you're just looking for the surrogate part of the journey? So depending on what you will need will actually determine which program and which destination kind of, fits you best. Now, on the screen, you will see a bit of a snapshot of the different prices and the different programs that are offered in Mexico, the USA, and Colombia. And again, these destinations are for our gay couples and also for our single intended parents. For our heterosexual couples, the prices are the same for Mexico and the USA program. But again, instead of Colombia, you have the programs that are available in Georgia. Now, what is actually included in those prices? Well, for the purpose of tonight's webinar, that's a very broad question. It's kind of difficult to answer in its full, and it'll also depend on your own current situation, the destination you choose, the program you choose within that destination. But what you're kind of seeing on the screen right now is a bit of a snapshot of all the inclusions that you'll get on the USA program. For Tim and I, on the Colombia program, again, everything was included. All the IVF costs, our egg donors, our egg donor compensation, the medication, the egg donor retrieval, embryo creation, all the surrogate screening, everything you can kind of think of for a surrogacy journey was included in that Colombian program, which was just amazing for us. Sometimes an easier question to answer is what's not included, because that list is actually a lot smaller in those in our guarantee programs. So in the guarantee programs, there are a lot of things that are built into the price. So there's actually only a couple of things that intended parents might need to cover themselves. And I'll touch base on a couple of those tonight. So some of the things, again, depending on the destination that you choose that may not be included, are any of your own related tests. So your semen freezing, your genetic testing, any of your own travel and accommodation, those will be self-related costs at your own expense. Now, the majority of egg donors are included in the program. However, there are some premium egg donors available on the website. So if you do choose a premium egg donor outside the program, that will come at additional cost. Now, premium egg donors don't mean more fertile or more chances of success. It just simply means that these egg donors believe that they want more money for their eggs, which is fine. Anyone can determine the price or the value of the eggs they provide, but the majority of the egg donors are covered in the program. You may choose also a surrogate in the USA program that has a higher compensation. Sometimes that can come at additional cost. If you require additional services such as PGS testing is included in the USA and Colombia program, but PGS testing is not included in Mexico. You might choose a gender guarantee program in the USA. You might need sperm washing. So these are all the additional things that you can potentially add on to your journey that aren't included in the program and that will come at additional cost. In the USA, the biggest variable cost is actually your surrogate. And a lot of things that's not covered with her health insurance policy, that's the big one, her premiums, and also her travel back and forth to the clinic. Things like if your surrogate has an unplanned twins pregnancy, or if she suffers from a miscarriage, then she's normally entitled to a further compensation. And again, that's outside the program. But all of these items are clearly outlined in the contract for intended parents, so they can review that. There are no hidden costs or no hidden surprises. Well, just before we head off, my apologies. Just before we're nearing the end of the evening, I want to thank you very much for your attention. And just before we head to the Q&A section, I'd actually just kind of like to finish with a bit of advice, and advice that was actually provided to us at the very beginning of our journey. The first one is do your research. Find out, who's out there. What are they offering? What are the programs? What are the destinations? There are a lot of new clinics that are popping up. There are a lot of new agencies that are popping out. And it's very quite easily to set up a beautiful Instagram page with wonderful pictures, slick marketing. So our advice is to always look beyond that. Look beyond the pretty pictures. Look for the evidence. Look for the history of the agency. How long have they been around? Look for the intended parents that have done a journey with them, and look for the stories. Look for the births. The next advice that we got is to get curious. Don't be afraid to ask the questions. Don't be afraid to book one-on-one consults and ask the scary questions. What happens if the clinic goes under? What happens if the destination closes its doors to international travelers? Does the agency have a global footprint that can offer them another program in a similar destination or somewhere else? What happens if my surrogate has a miscarriage? Is that still included in the program? Can I start again? Am I still covered? How many attempts am I actually covered for? There are some agencies or clinics out there that say, yes, we are a guaranteed program, but only for 3 attempts. So look, really, don't be afraid to get curious. Don't be afraid to read the fine print. Now, those 2 points are not to make you scared or to make you distrust everything. It's about empowering you to make sure that you are making the right decision. Because in the very beginning, it can feel very overwhelming. You can feel like there is a lot of information out there. It's all conflicting. It's kind of hard to make sense of what's out there. And that kind of leads me to my final piece of advice, which is don't be afraid to take that next step. Everybody here tonight, I take my hat off to you. Congratulations, you've taken a step. A surrogacy journey is built up on many, many steps. Sometimes it does feel like 2 steps forward and 2 steps back. Thank you, Paula Abdul, for that classic. But keep taking those steps because each one brings you a little bit closer to that end dream of being a parent, that little bit closer. So again, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your time this evening. Thank you for your attention. I'm now going to quickly look at the Q&A section to see if anybody has left any questions. I can see a couple have come in. While I am checking that, there is a QR code on the screen. So if anyone is interested in booking a one-on-one consult, that goes directly to my booking calendar. I will be staying on here a little bit past 8. So if anyone does have any direct questions, we can kind of go from there. But I'm going to quickly look at the Q&A now. I'll keep it off the screen, actually. What is the process if I have a local egg donor, but not a surrogate? Would this work? Okay, if I'm answering this question or if I'm interpreting this question correctly, if you know somebody in the destination, so Colombia, Mexico, USA, if you know somebody that you want to be an egg donor, it's still possible. They can come into the clinic so long as they meet other requirements and they can do an egg retrieval. It will be dependent on whether or not you'll still be included under a guarantee plan because you're using an egg donor outside of the website, but that's an option. Which is the biggest and most reliable egg donor website company you can recommend? So each of the clinics we work with has their own egg donor websites. In Colombia, the clinic we work with has over 300 egg donors on the website. Mexico has about 100. The USA, we work with 2 clinics that actually gives you access to over 500 egg donors. If you are looking to do your own journey, you're just looking for an egg donor, I'll take that conversation offline and we can have a bit of a one-on-one chat. How many times can a woman donate eggs in each country in order to prevent? Yes, okay, so there is a limit to how many times an egg donor can be used. And in most countries, it's either 5 or 6. So there is a possibility that your egg donor can come in and do multiple retrievals, but the maximum that they can do is either 5 or 6, depending on the destination. Next question, and yes, I see this quite a lot, and I should have mentioned this in the evening. In the case of gay couples, can the sperms of both the men be mixed and then donated to the embryo so that both partners are equal fathers, without any distinguishment? Unfortunately not. And look, that's a very good question. My partner and I had the exact same one. Is it possible to put both the sperm in a cup and, see which one gets there quickly? Unfortunately, no, that's not an approach that any of the clinics allow, just because of the legal framework and the information that needs to be provided on the birth certificate and all the paperwork. So unfortunately not. Can you please elaborate on permanent residence and citizenship process? Good question, probably too long for tonight's discussion. We always defer to a migration agent or a citizen lawyer, but I'm more than happy to talk about that process in a bit more detail in a one-on-one consult. So, please reach out if you want that. Another question, if I was to have an embryo in Australia, would an agency still support obtaining a surrogate? Yes, but only if you get that embryo to a destination. We can't help you with a surrogate here in Australia. We can only help if you get those embryos overseas to one of the different clinics. What is the difference between a shared guarantee and full guarantee in the USA program? Oh, great question. Thank you. It's a bit of a long answer, and we go into it again in a bit more detail in a consult, but at a very, very high level answer, don't get confused about the type of guarantee. You're still 100% covered for unlimited attempts for both of those. The only difference between a shared guarantee and a full guarantee is the number of eggs you initially receive from your egg donor. So if an intended parent or an intended couple says to me, I only want one baby, we're not looking at twins, we're not looking at siblings, then I recommend the shared guarantee program, because you're going to get just enough eggs to create just enough embryos for that one baby. If an intended parent says, no, we want twins, we want siblings, we want greater choices of embryos, then I recommend the full guarantee, because you're going to get more. From a numbers point of view, if an egg donor came in and had, for argument's sake, 30 eggs, on the shared program, you get about 10 of them. On the full guarantee, you'd get all 30. We are a couple in Australia. We have a local domestic surrogate family member, but need an egg donor. What is the process? Okay, so unfortunately, we can't help in that situation. If you have somebody in Australia that is willing to assist you as a surrogate, that's great, well done. You now need to find an egg donor. The way you do that is you need to, get vocal. Ask your friends, ask related relatives or friends of relatives, hop on Facebook groups. That's the only way that you can potentially do it. There won't really be an agency that can assist you with an egg donor. How does the double guarantee program actually work? Good question. So the double guarantee program is literally just 2 journeys. You have 2 separate journeys. You can have the same sperm provider. You can have different sperm providers. You can do them at the exact same time, but the double guarantee guarantees 2 live births. And that's the program that my partner and I did in Colombia. What happens if the egg splits into twins? Good question. I haven't seen it. I haven't seen it in any of the processes. I think over the past 15 years, Tammuz can probably count on our hand the number of times it actually has happened. And the reason for that is because of all the processes that happened beforehand. But it's a medical process, so yes, it can potentially happen. If it does happen, then the process will just continue as normal. The doctors will monitor it for medical safety. If it does turn into a successful twin pregnancy, in some of the programs, that's called an unplanned twin pregnancy. And then the surrogate is actually entitled to a further compensation of anywhere between $2,000 to $5,000. Are there any age restrictions? Yes, there are. It's different depending on the destination that you choose. I believe it's either 55. One of the intended parents has to be under 55 for the Colombia program and under 60 for the USA program. Can you use the same egg donor with 2 different sperms? Can you use the same egg donor with 2 different sperms in one surrogate? Yes, but only in the USA program. So the USA program is the only program that does twin embryo transfer, where you put 2 embryos into the one surrogate. On those programs, it's the same egg donor. So 2 intended parents can provide their sperm. You pick the one egg donor, you both fertilize those eggs to create embryos, and then you can both put an embryo into that surrogate. Are the prices listed in USD? Yes, all prices are in US dollars just because we're a global company. So everything is in US dollars. Thank you, Marlo. My question is, why is the Georgia program significantly cheaper compared to other destinations? Good question. Georgia is significantly cheaper, as is Colombia and Mexico, when you put it up against the USA. The main reason for that is a US dollar goes a lot further in Georgia, Colombia, Mexico than a US dollar goes in the US. And everything is just more expensive in the USA. So you, for want of a better word, you kind of get more for your dollar in Georgia and the other 2 countries. Don't think of it as a lesser quality program. We wouldn't put our name to any of these programs if we didn't believe in them. They are all really, really great programs, and they are just different price points for different intended parents. The USA is more expensive, but it does have a lot more benefits, that strong legal framework, the quicker exit process. But we understand it's a very expensive program, and it's not in everyone's budget. I have an egg donated by my best friend. I am the next of kin. She doesn't want to carry. The eggs are here in Oz. Could they be sent to Colombia, one of the other countries? Yes, I probably need to know a little bit more about your situation in that one. Maybe shoot me an email if you want to discuss it a little bit more offline. I don't think I can answer that one off the fly. What's in place in regards to surrogacies or to a surrogate's diet, drug and alcohol testing? Can you provide additional funding for quality nutrition intake for the surrogate? Is this measured in any way? Interesting question. So for this question here, depend on the destination, depend on the program. For example, on the Colombia program, the surrogate's diet is all assisted by the surrogate mother coordinator. So they're instructed, kind of what to purchase, what medications to take. They're provided a monthly allowance to cover all those things. Is there drug and alcohol testing throughout the program? No, there is initial drug and alcohol screening. There is the regular appointments with the psychologist and regular appointments, at the ultrasound, so the doctors can see how the baby is developing and if there's any concerns. Can you provide additional funding? Yes and no. It depends on the destination, depends on the program. I'll probably have that conversation more offline as a bit of a one-on-one question. Is it possible to have gender visibility in the Colombia program? No. Colombia does not allow any gender preference or gender selection. Colombia is the strictest of the destinations when it comes to gender. The Colombian clinic will always transfer the healthiest quality embryo. There's no choice when it comes to gender preference. The only time you might get a choice is if you've got an embryo of the exact same quality. So if you've got a 4AA female and a 4AA male, the clinic may take into account your preference, but at the end of the day, it's always the clinic's final decision in Colombia. Josh, did you do them at the same time? Good question. When we first started our journey, we were very naive. We thought we're going to start both journeys. We're going to have them come at the exact same time. We're going to only have to fly to Colombia once. But as you might have heard, things kind of happened in our surrogacy journey. We had a couple of failed embryo transfers. We kind of had to be rematched. So even though we started both programs at the exact same time, once one journey it took a little while until we got a confirmed pregnancy for the second one. So in the end, they're about 6 months apart. A lot of intended parents try and time it, and the clinic will do their best, but it's not always possible. Okay, is the double guarantee double the price? No, good question. In Colombia and Mexico, there's a saving. So if you know 100% that you're going to be doing, 2 babies, or you want 2 babies, the single price is around 67, 69, where the double's about 117. So there's a definite saving if you do the double. Is there a screening for risk of mental health, such as schizophrenia? Good question. It would depend on the egg donor and the egg donor website, whether or not that's included as part of their screening panel and whether or not it's listed. Depending on the program too, you can potentially ask that question of your egg donor. What is the process or cost for guaranteed twins on the USA program? There'll never be a program that guarantees twins, okay? The reason for that is that it's just too risky. The guarantee programs that we offer are the guaranteed for a singleton. So in the USA, you can do a twin embryo transfer where it's those 2 embryos into the single surrogate, but we can't guarantee that it's going to be a success. We'll guarantee you a singleton birth. So you might transfer 2 embryos and they both don't survive. And your next time you might try the exact same thing and only one of them survives. If that goes all the way to full term, then that's the guaranteed fulfilled. You can do a guaranteed double program in the USA. It's called a family plan, where you've got 2 separate surrogates, you've got 2 separate embryo transfers, and that starts from around 227,000. How much would you need to factor in for additional costs for the Colombia Guarantee program from our own experience? Great question. In a surrogacy journey, there's always going to be plus. The Colombia journey actually has the least amount of plus because of all the inclusions. But stuff like travel, accommodation, you do need to account for. You do need to account that you might be spending, 10 to 12 weeks in the country down route. So you need to pay for an Airbnb or a hotel for that period of time. Cost of living in Colombia is very, very affordable. So things like food, transport is very, very cheap. It just depends on how much you want to spend on things like accommodation. The grid said that Colombia had a wait list. How long currently is a wait list? Good question. So the reason why there's a bit of a wait list in Colombia is because we work with the very, very best clinics. And the best clinic in Colombia is Sellerheim Clinic. Now, not every agency can partner with them. Not every intended parent manages to get a spot there. And Dr. Pedro Martinez limits the number of intended parents that have an appointment each month. And this is to prevent bottlenecks and to prevent delays to everyone's journey as it goes on. So the wait list can change. Currently, it's actually not too bad. It's about 2 months. So that gives intended parents plenty of time to book flights, organize finances. That being said, if an intended parent says to me, look, I'm traveling next month and I absolutely need to be there at the clinic, we can have that conversation. So there's a bit of room to move if it's a necessity. With the double guarantee, is there a maximum time limit on when to do each one? The only difference, the time limit in Colombia and Mexico is 2 years. So once the birth of the first surrogacy journey is complete, you then need to, you've got 2 years before you can start your second journey. In the family plan on the USA, you've got a bit longer. You've got about up to 5 years. And guys, that looks like it is it. Thank you so much for all those additional questions. That was absolutely amazing. Your engagement has been absolutely wonderful. For anyone that has kind of some other unanswered questions, please feel free to shoot me an email or book a consult. Again, they're always free. It's non-committal. Lovely meeting you all tonight. Enjoy the rest of your evening. I haven't had a sip of my wine all night, so I'm going to go enjoy that now. But again, enjoy the rest of your weekend, and thank you so much. Take care.